Hello and welcome to the City Club of Eugene and Springfield City Club's April 26, 2024 program. My name is Andrew Kallick and I am City Club of Eugene's president. We're coming to you today from Carlita's Restaurant at the Gordon Hotel in the heart of downtown Eugene, and it's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speaker and to all of you joining us in person, online, and over the radio. For 3 decades, the City Club of Eugene has remained dedicated to its founding mission to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to help connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, to learn something new, and to take active steps to make a difference in this city and region we love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you this week to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. And thank you to the City of Eugene for its support as well. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a longtime listener, I invite you to support our work by becoming a member, a sponsor, or by volunteering to be part of our committee or our board. You can do all those things and more at cityclubofelugene.org and springfieldcityclub.org. 2 candidates are running in the May 21st election to replace outgoing District Attorney Patricia Perlo. Today we'll hear from candidate Christopher Parosa, who is currently Chief Deputy District Attorney for Lane County. His opponent, James Clevenger, responded this week with regrets, citing a family event. With that, I'll turn the mic over to Michael Dunn from KLCC, our moderator for today's program. Michael.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an honor to be here to represent KLCC and to be here for this joint forum between the City Club of Eugene and the City Club of Springfield. Because we're talking to only one candidate, this is going to be more of an interview than a forum, but our hope is that we provide you an opportunity to learn more about both Mr. Parosa and the office of the District Attorney. And now I'd like to introduce our candidate. As a career prosecutor, Christopher Parosa has led investigations, charged, negotiated, and tried murder, sexual assault, child sexual abuse, domestic violence, elder abuse, and nearly every other type of crime over his 20-year career. As a senior prosecutor, trial team leader, and the current Chief Deputy District Attorney, Parosa has trained hundreds of police officers, prosecutors, victims advocates, and law students on effective prosecution and victim advocacy. He also assists in managing the District Attorney's nearly $14 million annual budget for the criminal, child support, enforcement, and death investigation divisions. And Parosa currently sits on the board of directors of Kids First Child Advocacy Center. Please help me welcome Christopher Parosa. And please start us off with your opening statements.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad you're all here today. Thank you for coming and sharing this event with us.
Could you be a little closer to the mic?
Of course, I will do my very best. Thank you, City Club, for having me and for holding this event. It's an important event. People don't often think of District Attorney's Office, the position of District Attorney, as one that is important with regard to politics and things of that nature, but it is a position that we ultimately vote for every 4 years. It's also a position that we do not do enough discussion publicly about and what the District Attorney Office actually does on a day-to-day basis, or how we make the decisions that we make in our office. So forums like this are very important, and I'm glad that you are all here and we can talk about those issues today. As indicated, I'm Chris Parosa, the Chief Deputy District Attorney for Lane County. I've been in this office for 18 years. I was in Josephine County District Attorney's Office for about 18 months before that. I grew up in Salem, went to Sprague High School, where I ultimately met my wife of 26 years, Jana. After I went initially to Oregon State University, graduated there in 2000, graduated from the University of Oregon School of Law in 2003. Spent about 9 months at an insurance defense firm in San Diego, California, before I quickly decided that that career was not for me, nor was the pace of life of California. So being an Oregon boy, I wanted to return home, and my wife agreed, and we ended up coming back to Oregon. One of the great things about starting your prosecutorial career in a small office like Josephine County is that if you show any aptitude at all, they're going to give you big cases right away. And I was very fortunate that I was working murder cases within the first 12 months of my employment. But when a position opened here in Lane County in April of 2006, we saw an opportunity to return home to the Willamette Valley, and we jumped at that opportunity, especially because the Lane County District Attorney's Office has a really stellar reputation amongst the Oregon District Attorneys Association for being a very highly professional office. And that's what I found upon my arrival. I started as a felony attorney, quickly established myself as one of the county's more prolific trial attorneys. I quickly went to the vehicular homicide team. I was an adjunct instructor for the University of Oregon School of Law, teaching both prosecution and advanced prosecution for about 6 to 7 years. I was on the sexual assault task force here in Lane County, promoted to the major crimes team, where I handled a bunch of homicide cases, child sex abuse, sexual assault, elder abuse. Kind of all the things you think of in your mind's eye, prosecutor's office prosecute. Before then being promoted to a supervisory position over a felony trial team where I supervised both felony and misdemeanor attorneys. I became then chief deputy in 2021. In that position, my primary role is to act as a supervisor to the supervisor, if you will, the supervisors. I also lead the investigations unit in our office. I help set policies, run the Senate Bill 819 program, run the 416 program, and I help to manage our $14 million budget. I'm running because the attorneys in my office largely asked me to. It was, Patty Perlow let it be known in 2000 that that was going to be her last time running for office. The attorneys in our office got together, and ultimately I guess I drew the short stick to some degree. They pointed to me as the person that they wanted to be leading the office in the future. I believe in the criminal justice system. I believe that it can be used to ultimately promote safety and health of our community, promote accountability, and also compassion to those who are the accused in our system. I genuinely love working with our community partners, those in parole and probation, those in law enforcement, in behavioral health, across all spectrums of the criminal justice system. We have a great community that is highly collaborative, and I enjoy working with all of those partners, and I think we do some really amazing work here. I also really care for all 76 members of the district attorney's office. We are like an extended family. They care for me and I care for them, and so in that respect, I'm a bit, at this point as chief deputy, like a protective father, if you will. I want to make sure that they have the best and all the tools that they need to ultimately be successful at their jobs and hopefully to some degree in life. So that's a quick introduction to me.
Thank you so much. Let's start with our first question. According to the Oregon Secretary of State's office, a district attorney is equally responsible for seeking justice for crime victims while also protecting a defendant's right to due process and a fair trial. My question to you is, tell us how you would seek and achieve that balance between victims of crimes and those accused of crimes.
That's a great question. Yeah, that is the balance that we ultimately have to strike. The thing that a district attorney or deputy district attorney does with every criminal case is ultimately they have to balance the interests of the community and community safety with the rights of the victim and then the rights of the accused. And the way we do that on an individual criminal case is to ultimately take the investigation that has been provided to us by law enforcement. We don't conduct the investigations ourselves. We're not a self-initiating agency. Instead, we rely upon our partners in law enforcement to ultimately conduct the investigations, and then they submit it to us. While they have the ability to ultimately arrest people on the basis of probable cause, that's not the standard we use in the district attorney's office to make a determination as to whether or not we're going to charge the case. Instead, we lean upon the tremendous experience that we ultimately have in being in trials routinely and knowing what it takes to ultimately prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the standard by which we have to prove cases in the criminal justice system. So we sit down and we read those reports. Where necessary, we ask for additional investigation by the law enforcement agencies. At times, we will notice, because we are required to know and understand the law in the realm of criminal law, we ultimately have to then tell them from time to time, we can't charge your case because you searched or seized some evidence illegally, and we can't use that evidence, therefore we can't prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt. So we strike the balance by simply by looking at the facts of the case and determining whether or not a law has been violated and whether or not there's adequate evidence to ultimately prove that case before a judge or a jury later on.
On your campaign website, you talk about a key priority of yours is to confront the mental health and drug crisis. If you could explain to us what you mean by that statement and how you'll do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we are limited here in the criminal justice system to the tools that we are provided by the state government, our local governments, and the framework that has been constructed for us within the law itself. We have a mental health crisis that we face in this community and around the state that we need to address. One of the things that we ultimately need to begin to do is transition those who are mentally ill out of the criminal justice system and into other alternatives to the criminal justice system. It's no secret that the criminal justice system is not a good place to be dealing with the mentally ill. We're a clumsy tool, if you will, for dealing with the mentally ill, because the tools that are available to us in the criminal justice system are simply not appropriate for addressing mental illness, right? Jail and prison, we can virtually all agree, those are not the places to be housing our mentally ill people. But when we engaged in deinstitutionalization of the state hospitals around in this country from the 1960s through the 2000s, we didn't implement an alternative system, and we didn't put in place an alternative system for those folks. So in essence, with nowhere else to turn to put these people into, civil remedies or other options, the criminal justice system became the de facto place for dealing with the mentally ill. And we've done, in my opinion, we've done a disservice to the mentally ill, the community, and ultimately, I think we can say at this point, we're failing those people. So what I would do as district attorney is work with the partnerships I have amongst the legislators in our community to try and create some alternatives to the criminal justice system for those people. I want to see a liberalization of civil commitment standards, number one. Number two, I'd like to see assisted outpatient treatment programs implemented, which is a civil alternative. It's where a judge can essentially order involuntary treatment of a person within the community to address their mental illness, but outside the realm of jails and prisons and things of that nature. They're using assisted outpatient treatment programs in Florida and New York, California, and they've seen a dramatic improvement in their circumstances. They've seen mental illness, homelessness amongst mentally ill drop as much as 77%. They've seen reduced arrests of mentally ill people by 83%. They've seen less hospitalizations of mentally ill people to the tune of about 77%. And they've seen incarceration of the mentally ill drop as much as 87%. So I would like to promote and begin to advocate alternatives to the criminal justice system like those things. Now, it's going to come with funding, because the first step is to develop a mechanism ultimately for doing it. The second step, and it's an absolutely necessary step, is to then get funding ultimately for those programs. The European Union has 73 beds per 100,000 citizens in Europe. California Hospital Association requires a minimum of 50 mental health beds per 100,000 population. We in the state of Oregon have 39.6 beds per 100,000. That's unacceptable. We need more local beds. We need more beds at the state hospital. We need to fund this like it truly is a crisis. And I can be a voice ultimately to go and talk to legislators about the things we need.
Talk to us about your position on prosecuting low-level crime. You know, a couple of years ago, the then DA said that the office didn't have enough staff to do that. What about now and going forward?
Yeah, this is a huge, well, it's one of my 3 priorities for my time as district attorney. We have 24 criminal division attorneys in the Lane County District Attorney's Office. That is one less than we had in the mid-1980s, when we had 40% lower population in Lane County. And for a community our size, 400,000 people, the national standard for district attorneys for a community that size is somewhere between 36 and 40 criminal division attorneys. We have been woefully understaffed for a long time, and we were cruising along, doing more with less at the command of the county commissioners for years and years and years. Unfortunately, beginning about 10 years ago, the prosecution of criminal cases became much more complex through workforce magnifiers like some legislative mandates, appellate criteria changing, and then ultimately the proliferation of surveillance and body cam videos. It's just simply impossible to handle the same number of cases we did in the early 2000s as we can today. And that's because, think about this for a minute, any one case might see several officers show up, right? You do a call for service on somebody, they send multiple officers, they have their body cams running in order to know whether or not the police report that they ultimately submit comports with what witnesses and the scene that they envisioned when they got there or saw when they got there, and then what the witnesses ultimately said. We have to be able to look at those videos, but sometimes we're spending 10 or 20 hours reviewing body cam and surveillance video. That's 10 to 20 hours that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we didn't have to spend reviewing evidence. And I gotta tell you, this is a constitutional crisis, because when deputy district attorneys are overworked, they don't review that material. They are being told, we every year have 5,200 to 6,000 cases we're asked by law enforcement to review. And we got to get that work done because we're the only ones with legal authority to ultimately do it. If you don't have the time, based on the time restrictions we operate under legally, to review all the material, how can you know you're doing the right thing for the right reasons? You can't. And so when COVID hit, and Judge McAlpin wouldn't like to hear me say this, but the truth was the courts shut down for 18 months. And those cases just sat undisposed for months and months and months and months. At the same time, we saw violent crime and nonviolent crime rise tremendously during the course of the pandemic, which meant our caseloads exploded. We came out of COVID, 1,400 cases in backlog, and had seen an explosion of crime in the meantime. our prosecutors had 2 to 3 times the level of work they could possibly consider to do. So we took it, we then lost 15 prosecutors in 18 months, because when conscientious prosecutors feel like they don't have the time to adequately review their cases, or ultimately do the work that they're being asked to do, they become dissatisfied. And these are highly marketable people, folks. In the legal world, a trial attorney is super valuable. They can go out and find high-paying jobs, 2 to 3 times what we pay them at the county, to work on lower caseloads, and that's what they did. So they also, in other places, they can offer things like work from home. As deputy district attorneys, we're in court every day. We can't offer that to people. So we started to see people leave the office, and we were very close to system collapse within our office, because we got to the point where we were down to about 14 prosecutors at one point, and I saw more tears in a span of 9 months in our office from attorneys saying, I just can't keep up, than I had seen in 18 and a half years prior to that in a DA's office. These are highly professional people, and they had just collapsed. So we implemented a no-file list of nonviolent crimes and low-level crimes in June of 2022 as a means of simply trying to save, if you will, our employees from themselves, because they would have tried to prosecute all of those cases, and their job dissatisfaction would have gone up more and more, and ultimately we'd have had nobody there to prosecute crimes here in Lane County. I have to give kudos to the Board of County Commissioners. They saw the need to raise the incomes for these people to be commensurate with other partners or other agencies around the state, and they did that. That helped. It was a tremendous buoy to our spirits internally, and we were very fortunate that we got to lean on our stellar reputation, because very experienced attorneys from other locales heard that the Lane County District Attorney's Office was hiring, and they came. We got a very experienced deputy DA out of Lincoln County. We got one who's with us today from Umatilla County. We got 2 very experienced deputy district attorneys from Jackson County. And by January of this year, we were back to being fully staffed, and we were back to prosecuting all the crimes that we were supposed to be prosecuting. Thanks.
I'd love to hear your opinion. I would love to hear you talk about the idea of perhaps creating more transparency within the DA's office, both in terms of programs, but also if you could explain why it's important in the first place.
Absolutely. This is great, because we're hitting all the things that are a priority to me. Transparency is one of my top priorities. The way ultimately it works in the criminal justice system is that people's faith in the criminal justice system is predicated upon what they're seeing develop within the criminal justice system. And unfortunately, we work in a world where we have to operate in some level of secrecy, both by rule and by prudence. And criminal investigations are not made public. And the district attorney's office works under ethical obligations that says that we won't share with the public the details of a criminal investigation for fear that we will ultimately poison the potential jury pool with information. Try the case in the media, right? We don't want that. We want to have 12 people come in to try a felony case that have no preconceived notions about the case. So through the years, the district attorney's office has seemed, I would say, as if we aren't sharing the information regarding cases or decisions that we've been made. And that's something, though, that I think we can change without violating our rules. We can do things like disclose the public records to criminal investigations at the earliest possible point. One of the things that I believe in is ultimately within the realm of public records laws, taking a very liberal view of what's in the public interest so that we can disclose things that maybe previously before were not disclosed, maybe like body cam videos in various scenarios. I want to create a public dashboard that you can go to our website and see what types of cases are coming through the district attorney's office, what types of cases are being charged, what cases are not. I want to inform you through that very public mechanism with the information of what's going on in the DA's office. And then finally, I want to come and talk to all of you. I want to be out in the public more than maybe some of my predecessors were, talking to people and explaining the decisions that we ultimately have made. It's time for us in the district attorney's office to have a more forward-facing position and to talk to the community directly about what it is we do, the limitations or restrictions we're working under, and then how we're making the decisions that impact all of your lives.
You talked about this a little earlier, but I want to pull on the thread a little bit. Is what can the district attorney do to sort of redirect individuals before they become a problem in law enforcement?
It's a great question, and one we are actually wrestling with right at the moment. So one of the things that is going to be of critical importance to Lane County and the state of Oregon over the course of the next 9 to 12 months is going to be, with the recriminalization of controlled substances, how we're going to employ this deflection program that was contemplated by the state legislature. That is a program that is designed, in theory, to ultimately allow police officers to go out and make contact with somebody who may be in possession of controlled substances, and then instead of doing what we would ordinarily do and to cite that person or ultimately take them to the jail, is to call in a mental health peer support person who can meet that person right there on scene and take them to a facility that will ultimately begin to treat them for whatever their condition may be. Think of it like cahoots for drugs at some level, where they take them to a treatment facility like Emergence or one of those to immediately begin the process of trying to get drug treatment. Then, if they engage in that treatment program, the criminal justice system is never involved in that person's life. So what we're trying to do, and I can tell you there are high-level discussions. I was in a meeting yesterday about how Lane County is going to ultimately be able to work deflection in our community. We are working really hard to come up with a program that's going to work for us. The good news is we have tremendous collaboration within our community. Our behavioral health partners, our treatment partners, our parole and probation, the courts, the prosecutors, the law enforcement officers are genuinely interested in seeing this program work for our community. Not with more prosecutions of drug addicts, but ultimately to deliver on the promise of ballot measure 110, which was more treatment for more people more quickly. That's our hope in this process. Now, we've been given back the tool of potential prosecution in the event that those folks are unamenable to it, but our hope is that we can deflect them immediately into treatment and that treatment will stick. And it's not going to stick for everybody, but if we can even get a percentage of the people to engage in treatment, to better their lives, to make them healthy, happy, and productive citizens, I see this as a big win for all of us.
I do want to take this opportunity to remind our audience that you're listening to a joint candidate forum hosted by the City Club of Eugene and the City Club of Springfield, and we're talking with candidate for District Attorney Christopher Parosa. Christopher, my next question for you is this. If elected, and maybe projecting out a few years, how would you like the DA's office to be perceived by the larger Lane County community, and what would you have to do to create that vision?
What it really needs to happen is ultimately we need to begin to highlight the things that we're doing that are the good things we're doing already at some level. We do have very conscientious prosecutors in our office. You know, people don't know this, but we get 5,200 to 6,000 criminal referrals a year. We end up no filing about 25 to 30% of those cases, either because we've made a determination that There isn't sufficient evidence to prosecute those people. There's been some violation of their constitutional rights, or that the case just simply isn't worth pursuing for one reason or another, meaning that it's not in the community interest ultimately to prosecute that person for the crime. We are doing what we can to ultimately ensure that folks who don't, maybe they are not criminally oriented, but they committed a criminal offense, aren't treated like criminals for the rest of their lives. We also have a robust Senate Bill 819 program that has not gotten a ton of local attention, but has been used by Lewis and Clark Law School as the model for the state on that. What Senate Bill 819 is a discretionary resentencing program that says that a person can apply to have their prior sentence or conviction looked at again by the district attorney's office to see whether or not it comports with the interests of justice today. And I got to tell you, there was a ton of skepticism around this bill when it was passed in 2021 by all the district attorney's offices. And it was viewed somewhat skeptically in my office. But I believed in this. I thought we could make some real changes here that would be good for our community and for the individuals impacted. So I asked Patty Perlow if she'd let me take a crack at writing a policy for our office, and I did. I took a lot of time to ultimately craft a policy with certain restrictions that she had ultimately put on the policy, and we implemented it. I've done 135 reviews of cases. I've given sentencing reductions to 41 people at this point. 22 instances where I've reduced the incarcerative sentence that they received. It's a prison sentence generally. And 19 times where I've simply taken somebody who ultimately was convicted of a non-expungable offense in the past, and I opened the case solely for the purpose of dismissing it so that they don't carry forward the collateral consequences, the scarlet letter of being a felon for the rest of their life. It's been one of the most rewarding programs that I've ever been involved in my 20 years as a career prosecutor. I'm really proud of it, and I hope to expand it more in the future. So we're doing good work. It just is going to take somebody, a leader, to ultimately come out and share with you the things that we are doing. I need to be better about that than my predecessors to some degree in sharing what we're doing. It's tough to do in a market like Eugene, right? Because we don't have the kind of functioning media that some places like Portland or LA or Chicago or those places have. But that's why I got to come out and meet you where you're at and talk to you about it directly. And so I view that to be part of my job, if not the biggest part of my job going forward.
You talked already a little bit about Measure 110, but I wanted to also ask, it was a measure passed by the voters, and it's been overturned by the legislature. I kind of wanted to get your opinion about, are you glad that that happened, even though it was the will of the voters? Was that the right course of action for what we need in Oregon?
The ballot measure or the reform effort by the legislature?
The reform effort by the legislature.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely supported it. I appeared at a debate a few months ago at a City Club event on this issue. I believed in the reform effort that went through, and that's because I think there is a way. We were sold ballot measure 110 under the idea that incarceration rates had flown up and that we were over-incarcerating people. And it's true that if you look from the 1970s through 2009, when you look at incarceration rates, it was on a steady trajectory uphill. And that's because we addressed the heroin, crack cocaine, and methamphetamine crises that ripped across our country in what was a non-appropriate way, in my opinion. We just decided we're going to incarcerate everybody. From 2009, if you look at incarceration statistics, it dropped every year to hitting a low in 2019. And that's because prosecutors and courts had begun to understand that we needed to begin to treat the root cause of the criminal activity by treating addiction. And so that's what we began to do, sending people through programs like the drug court program, the 416 program, alternatives to incarceration that got people the kind of treatment that they needed to ultimately get out of a life of addiction and hopefully become healthy, happy, and productive again. So I supported the effort. Now we have to make good on this deflection program, and there's a lot of work to be done. We are working really hard with the county, with county officials, with our sponsors and emergents and these other things to create a program that'll ultimately be a good deflection from the criminal justice system, but that will provide us a hammer at some level. I mean, it's a terrible way of looking at it, but that's what it was meant to be by the legislature, that if they are not amenable to treatment, they refuse to engage in treatment, then we can take additional steps to ultimately force treatment upon them, which is what we do. We don't, low-level drug offenders do not spend time in prison. They don't spend a great deal of time in incarceration, but we can use jail as a tool to motivate them ultimately to engage in treatment. We hope they don't have to go that far. We hope that we can deflect them and they choose for themselves ultimately to get treatment. But if they don't, then we can force it upon them. That's our goal.
It's been often said that in our nation and here in Oregon and here in Lane County, we don't necessarily apply the law evenly to everyone. And I wanted to get your opinion about how we make sure that everyone, especially people in marginalized communities, the law is applied evenly to them.
Yeah. So a bit of a misnomer with regard to some of that stuff. We have two of our deputy district attorneys that are here in the room today. We often don't know the demographic backgrounds of the people we prosecute when we're prosecuting them until we are shared that information by later on, usually through defense attorneys telling us what the person's background ultimately is. We don't know what skin color they are. We don't know anything about, most of the time, unless their name or something announces it, what background, what their background ultimately is. So we try and just follow the standard, which is our constitutional obligation and statutory obligation to the community, which is to say, when we get in custody for purposes of a review, we determine whether or not, based on the evidence that's been provided to us, there's evidence that a law has been violated, and then secondarily, we determine whether or not there is adequate evidence to ultimately prosecute those people. Of course, we learn about demographics and backgrounds and things like that later on down the road. And we try and use what limited prosecutorial discretion we ultimately have in this process to help those people out. I can tell you the Lane County District Attorney's Office, with the attorneys we have in there now, are very conscientious about issues relating to this, and they are very concerned about these issues, and we're doing what we can to ultimately try and make this as fair a process as we can. But we're not a self-initiating agency, as I said before. The law enforcement officers ultimately throw the cases before us that they throw before us, and we're asked to simply deal with them. So we're making the efforts we can, certainly.
You've obviously been in the DA's office for a long time. If you could give us perhaps a 100-day plan, or what are your priorities if you were to win the election, as soon as you get into office, what are those priorities, and how would you prioritize them?
Yeah, it's going to be a busy 100 days, let me tell you. We have till September 1 to figure out this deflection program, and it's either going to succeed or not by how we set it up in the first 100 days of that program. So between now and September, we ultimately have to come up with a program that is going to be effective, that ultimately sends people away from the criminal justice system and into treatment programs to make them work. There's a lot of work that has to be done. There's a lot of funding issues that have to be addressed. Who's going to house the primary responsibility for tracking all these people? What agencies are we going to include? Who's going to hire or ultimately control the peer support people who are going to meet these people out on the streets? there's so many unanswered questions around this that we are now wrestling with, because it only got passed about less than a month ago now, and we're just still trying to basically pull the bill that came out, 4002, from the legislature apart to figure out what we're going to do about it. But this is a key issue for us all in this community, because if we can make this program successful, we're going to see the crime rates drop in our community. If we can get more people into treatment programs, we're going to see that crime rate reduce here, and the quality of life for all Lane County residents is going to get better. So we want to encourage treatment, but we have to have an effective program to do that. I would expand the Senate Bill 819 program. There are certain restrictions in it right now that exist that ultimately I'd like to remove. People who maybe received a prior downward departure are currently not eligible for Senate Bill 819 relief. I'd like to see that restriction and some others removed. I want to begin work in earnest on changing the protocols and practices around our IDFIT team. I've had a tremendous amount of conversation with folks in this realm over the course of the last 2 years as I've been a policy member on the Interagency Deadly Force Investigation Team. And I'd like to create more transparency, more compassion for the victims. I'd like to see us take some steps to ultimately make these investigations more public more quickly if we can. So those are just some of the things I'm hoping to do in the first 100 days, but there are a lot of other things that are going to need to be accomplished as well.
You know, if you win, you become the boss, and I'd love to get your, kind of read on what makes a good assistant district attorney, what makes the type of staff that you think we need to be able to execute your vision?
So one of the unique positions about being, if you will, the boss of a bunch of attorneys is that they're all professionals. So the philosophy in our office is, and it certainly is my philosophy, that ultimately we need to hire the most professional people we can, who see the world philosophically like we do, who operate well, who create a culture where we all work together, because it is a team effort in a district attorney's office. And then your job as the boss is to set policy and get out of the way to a large degree. The people that we have on staff right now, I couldn't be more comfortable with. They are all great people that I've had, with the exception of Dave Schwartz, who's in the back right now. I think I've had a hand in hiring almost everybody we have on staff, with the exception of a few senior prosecutors who are about to retire. So I'm really comfortable that that crew is competent, that they understand the mission that we've set out for them, and that they will do a good job and keep me apprised of what's going on, so that I can come to you as a community and talk about what we were doing as an office. That's really my job, is largely to set broad policy and then hire good people that will follow, adhere to those policies, and ultimately do the right thing for the right reasons.
Unfortunately, in our nation, in our state, and even here in Lane County, we've seen kind of an uptick, sometimes up and down, on this issue of hate crimes. And I wanted to get your opinion on what the district attorney's office can do to help solve that problem. Maybe it can't be solved, but at least lower the temperature in some regard.
Sure, and this is a really big issue, and unfortunately, sadly, this is becoming something that is more common in our society, tragically. Let me tell you the dirty little secret about hate crime in the state of Oregon. The way hate crimes are currently written is very difficult to prosecute. There is no other crime in the state of Oregon where you are commanded to prove someone's motivation for committing a criminal act. There isn't one. Hate crimes, bias crimes, as they're known in the state of Oregon, is the only crime that makes the state of Oregon prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the person was motivated by some discriminatory aspect. And we need to see those laws change, frankly. We need to see those laws make the standard less. The reason why a lot of prosecutors' offices don't prosecute a lot of these is it's very difficult to prove those charges. And the penalties associated with bias hate crimes in the state of Oregon are very de minimis. They're very low. Often, if you have an assault where somebody out on the street today attacks another person with a knife or a bat or some other thing that could be considered a weapon, we have available to us assault in the second degree, which is a mandatory minimum 70 months in the Department of Corrections. If somebody attacks you with a bat, we can charge them with assault too, which doesn't require any evidence of motive, just that they intended to engage in assaultive conduct on that person, which is usually pretty self-evident in those circumstances, right? But if I charge a bias crime, at best, it's a Class C felony that's rated at, I believe it's a crime seriousness level 6. So unless they have a really bad criminal history, a violent history, they are going to be presumed to go to probation right away. So we have a difficult law to prove, and we have sentencing restrictions in what we can do with them once we prove those charges. So you can imagine if we have a discriminatory-based attack out in our society, we charge the heaviest offense we can. Often it's assault 2, assault 1. Maybe it could be a level of homicide. And that is easier to prove, and it comes with a bigger stick at the end of it. So I've had this conversation with several local legislators recently that I believe that we need some changes to the rules around hate crimes in the state of Oregon to make it easier for us to ultimately be able to prove those charges. And then when we do, we need to have the ability to ultimately give those people more significant sentences than we currently are.
As we're sitting here, the Supreme Court is considering a case emanating out of Oregon, out of Grants Pass, that would perhaps very much fundamentally change the way we police the homeless. I wanted to get your opinions. Obviously, it's a crisis throughout our community of the unhoused. I wanted to get your opinions and talk about policing the homeless, what we should be doing, what we can be doing better, and if that Supreme Court case comes and sides with what Grants Pass wanted to do, how is that going to change everything here for Lane County?
It's a really good question. You know, the truth is that the district attorney's office has virtually no control over the homelessness issue. We just don't. That's the reality. Yeah, we deal with collateral effects of homelessness, crime that they may end up committing. But most of the crimes that ultimately homeless people or unhoused people commit are things like criminal trespass in the second degree or disorderly conduct because they're standing in a roadway or screaming at people on the street, right? So those are charges that generally don't come to our office. We live in a unique community where we have very vibrant municipal courts that ultimately handle those cases more frequently than the district attorney's office does. So if that happens, say, in Eugene, chances are very good that ultimately that person's going to be referred to the Eugene Municipal Court for some level of prosecution. And so certainly they're going to have to be dealing with this at a much greater frequency than we will. Yes, there will be some maybe bigger crimes that will come through our office related to homelessness as a result of police having more contact and potentially trying to move people along. But you know, we're not in a position of ultimately trying to criminalize the fact that a person is unhoused. We're not interested, and I know my partners at Eugene Police Department, Springfield Police Department, Sheriff Harold are not interested in trying to somehow change the rules to ultimately criminalize homelessness. We're going to do what we're having to do to ultimately make it so that people can enjoy their properties, the parks, and things of that nature in our community. free of potential threat or danger by people who are threatening and endangering us. But it's going to be something we're going to have to wrestle with. I'm not sure what the outcome of that case ultimately is going to be. It'll be fascinating to figure out what the Supreme Court ultimately chooses to do.
Kind of another current event that we can talk about. We're seeing throughout the country a lot of protests, especially on college campuses. Wanted to get your words on charging decisions in situations such as that, or if they're racial protests. Talk about how you view your department's role with regard to those kinds of issues.
Yep. So just to let everyone know that the 2020 protests I handled personally. I took on all of those cases. I was responsible for dealing with all of those cases, in part because I knew that those were going to be very highly political cases that would come through our office. There'd be a lot of questions about what we're doing with them and handling them. The policy that I took in that was ultimately this: we're not going to prosecute you generally because you're involved in a march down the street and you're blocking traffic. That was a policy that the Eugene Police Department and us had an agreement on, and Springfield actually did the exact same thing, where we weren't going to prosecute anyone for violating the law for walking down the middle of a street in the middle of a protest. Where we ultimately get involved is when you're exercising your rights begins to impede upon the rights of others to exercise theirs. Now we got a problem in society. And if law enforcement doesn't get involved in those situations, they very quickly spin out of control, and we see self-help remedies creep in, and other citizens will be attacking those protesters. So we took a very deliberate stance. We said, okay, we're going to let them take the streets and do their marches down streets. But as soon as they began to break windows, enter into buildings, start burning things, anything like that, then we're going to jump in and get involved with them. And as a result of our policy, we had 4 major protests, and then it was over. They handled it very differently in Portland, and the protests went on for, 8 months? Something like that. So that's the way we approach the protest cases here in Eugene, and we'll continue to do that. We're happy to have you exercise your right to shout to the heavens and to anyone who will listen what you believe. That's a constitutional right that each and every one of us should be allowed to exercise. But when you begin to infringe on the rights of others, then we have to step in, or things could become very dangerous very quickly.
Wanted to get your thoughts on this topic of police reform and get your opinions on, do you think that there are elements of policing going on in Lane County that needs reform?
We're fortunate, I gotta say right now, having worked in 3 different DA's offices through the course of my career, because I started up in Multnomah County, and then I obviously was in Josephine County and have spent the bulk of my career here in Lane County. That we have some really great police agencies in this community, and they are doing all they can right now to ultimately try and address, to be out on the streets doing the things that would make you and I proud of them for that. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. Do they have some members within their associations that are ultimately bad for our community? Yeah, they are. But my experience with whether it's Chief Shearer, Chief Skinner, Sheriff Harold, any of Corey Chase down in Cottage Grove, Mark Waddell over in Junction City, John Pitcher over in Florence, is that they were doing the very best they can to ensure that the police officers that are out on the streets in their communities are ultimately people that you'd be proud of. And I'm proud to work with virtually everyone in this law enforcement community. They receive a lot of training on what are the best tactics to use with people. Maybe not enough, if I'm being honest with you. I wish we had bigger budgets to do things like how to address or deal with the mentally ill. We put police officers in impossible situations of addressing mental illness out on our streets every day, and they're not trained to do that. They're not. And they'll tell you, we don't want to be the ones that are ultimately addressing that. But you can't call the fire department or even cahoots without law enforcement first going there and ensuring it's safe, the scene is safe for them. They won't come in. The fire department will not come in until the Eugene Police Department, for example, has cleared that scene and ensured it's safe. And the same's true of cahoots. So we're putting these folks in impossible situations. We should at least train them for it.
Probably have time for two more questions. And so, obviously gun violence is a problem in our society and our nation. And I wanted to get your words on, are there efforts that the DA's office can do to reduce gun violence in our community?
Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt that as we began to see the rise of drug addiction in our state and mental illness rise in our state, Oregon is the second most addicted state in the country. Over 18% of our population is addicted to some controlled substance. Think about that for a moment. That's 1 in 5 Oregonians are addicted to some substance. When we saw that occur, ultimately we saw violent crime rise dramatically. I went and looked. I pulled this because I was curious, because my staff started coming to me and saying, it feels like gun violence is up right now. So I pulled the statistics for all of our major crimes cases and unlawful use of a weapon cases for 2021, and we had 218 cases and 251 charges in that year on major violent crime. In 2022, that exploded to 458 cases and 651 charges. So we saw the cases more than double, and we saw almost 3 times as many charges from violent crimes come out of it. So there's no doubt we have a substance abuse problem that needs to be addressed, and we have to find the most effective way to ultimately begin to address it, because there is linkage between the increase in the dramatic and exponential increase in drug addiction and crime. And so if we can begin to address some of the root causes of that criminal behavior, mental illness, drug addiction, we can reduce the rates of those crimes. And that's what we're going to try to do through the deflection program. That's what I'm going to try to ultimately do by convincing the legislature that we need alternatives to the criminal justice system for mentally ill people. We need to have other civil remedies available to us to put those folks in there.
Let's go with this last question, about a minute, and I'll give you some time at the end if you want to make some concluding remarks. But, if you win this election, you become a leader of the district attorney's office. Tell us about your leadership style.
Well, I kind of alluded to it already. I'm a person that believes that, my staff is highly professional, and so, I don't believe in micromanaging them on a day-to-day basis. I have a tremendous amount of faith in each of these people that they are going to do the right things for the right reasons, and I'm checking in with them routinely to make sure that they are. I'm very fortunate that I have some good supervisory attorneys in our office right now, and those folks are constantly checking in, especially with younger attorneys who need some additional guidance. You don't come into the job of being a deputy district attorney knowing how to prosecute a case, how to try a case, what's the right charges I should be charging in this case, why should I deny, charges on this case. You have to be taught that at some level, and we have some excellent supervising attorneys that ultimately are going to help us do that. So I'm not one who gets involved immediately and jumps in and says, you need to make this decision. I want to hire good people and trust that they are doing their job. And then I rely on my supervising attorneys to ultimately keep me up to date on what's going on with them and their cases, and make the tweaks and do the trainings necessary to ultimately ensure that they're doing the right things for you as community members. So I'm not a real micromanage type of person, but where I see need for correction, you can be sure I'm going to jump in and correct, and I'm going to make sure that they are following what I set out as a priority or a policy within our office.
Great. And if you wanted to just make a concluding remarks, feel free.
Sure. I'll try and be brief. The reality with this election is that the question has been asked of me, why does experience matter in the district attorney realm? Why is that important for a district attorney to have some experience in this field? And I'll tell you why it is, because unlike in other political offices, where you can have some general ideas or a shared ideology with a bunch of people about what it is that should be done or how society should be, the district attorney's office is governed at almost all levels by rules. We have to follow statutes, we have to follow constitutional obligations, administrative obligations and rules. We have rules from the federal government that control how we do child support enforcement. We have to follow employment law in there. If you don't know those rules, and I'll tell you, I worked for a long time as a deputy district attorney, and I had my hands all the way around criminal law. But it wasn't until I became a supervisor in 2019 that I began to realize how little I actually knew about running a district attorney's office. You have to know what your obligations are under the law, or the community and victims and the accused are put at risk. So the fact that I have 20 years of experience in a district attorney's office and I have 5 years of supervisory experience ultimately makes me well prepared to be a person who runs this office, because I know, understand, and have operated within those legal requirements for the majority, if not all, of my career. So I think that's important for everyone to know. I do also want you to know, please feel free to come up and approach me and talk. I can be here for a while, so I'd be happy to talk at each and every one of you if that's what you'd like. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you. And please thank City Club of Eugene and Springfield.
This has indeed been our April 26th conversation at the City Club of Eugene and the Springfield City Club. Next Thursday, May 2nd, the Chamber of Commerce here in Eugene will be hosting a panel for our mayoral candidates ahead of the May election. You might have been to ours a couple of weeks ago. Go to the Chambers too. It can't hurt to hear from these candidates. They're going to be the leader of our city for the next few years, so that's a great opportunity. We at the City Club of Eugene will be back next Friday, May 3rd, at Willamette High School in Bethel, where we'll host candidates for positions 3 and 4 for the Lane County Commissioners primary. We hope to see you then. Thanks very much.